so excited to kick off the first event in Grow Vermont Together, which is a multi-part webinar series promoting dialogue and education around Vermont's developing adult use market, following the enactment of Act 164, which effectively legalizes adult use cannabis sales in our state. I'm going to give a quick overview of the series and what to expect, and I'm going to kick it off to Dave, who's joining us today as our first speaker. So the mission of this series is to enable participation and dialogue and education so that Vermonters, including small cultivators, women, and BIPOC-owned businesses, and just everyone can participate in the state's up-and-coming adult use market. We want people to have as much information as possible, and that's why these webinars are free, open to the public, and will include a wide range of speakers on topics like expungement, opt-in, social equity efforts, and down the road things like licensing and compliance and things you need to know to kind of get involved. Today's webinar has a very specific focus. We're starting with this topic because there's a tangible deadline for getting opt-in onto your town meeting day ballot. For those of you that are not familiar, municipalities in Vermont must proactively opt in order to allow cannabis retailers in their town or city. This was a concession of sorts. I personally feel it's going to slow things down a lot, but it's what we've got, and that's why we're focused today on really just educating people on what this means and how they can make it happen in their own community. We're very excited to welcome Dave for this session. Dave's been a friend of mine since I started getting involved at the Vermont Statehouse back in, I'm going to say 2015, which feels like 50 years ago. Dave successfully petitioned the Middlebury Selectboard to place the vote on the town meeting day ballot. Several other towns have followed suit since, including, I think, Brattleboro, St. Albans, Newport, and a few others. Just for context, there are 255 municipalities in Vermont. So that's a lot of various cities and towns. So Dave, a little bit about Dave. He is a Middlebury-based attorney and leading state house advocate for criminal justice and drug policy reform. He recently launched a boutique solo law practice where he represents local entrepreneurs in the emerging cannabis industry and beyond. This past November, Dave was also elected High Bailiff of Addison County, which is a position I knew very little about until recently. So congratulations, Dave. I'll turn it over to Dave in just a second. He's going to speak, and then we'll have some time for Q&A after. To submit your questions, just a little run through, you can use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. So there's Q&A and there's chat. You can submit your questions either way. When you send your question over, please include your name and town of residence if you feel comfortable with that. You can share your questions anytime during the presentation or after, and I'll kick those questions over to Dave. And hopefully everybody can walk away with a little bit more knowledge on how to do this and how to make it happen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he's going to walk us through just kind of what this means to get opt-in on your ballot.
Thank you, Monica. As Monica said, my name is Dave Silberman. I am an attorney in Middlebury. Recently launched my practice, Silberman PLC, as a sort of post-retirement project. I recently retired and quit my corporate gig in California. I've been telecommuting since 2009, 2013 in Vermont. My practice is focusing partially on local cannabis businesses and partially on other local businesses here in town. Trying to provide a sort of national law firm level corporate law advice and expertise at the local level at local rates. We'll see how it goes. And as Monica also said, I'm also the High Bailiff-elect of Addison County. I'll be sworn in on February 1st. I swear an actual elected position. I am, on February 1st, I will be the one person elected in Addison County with the authorities of a sheriff. I look forward to arresting him daily. No, I'm just kidding. He's a fine guy. We're not going to arrest him at all. So with that introduction, I will share my screen, I hope, and there we go. And so we'll jump right into it. Governor Scott allowed Act 164 to become law without his signature this past October. You guys can all thank our now former Lieutenant Governor David Silberman for that, because if he was not running for governor against Phil Scott, it would have been vetoed. But we now have a law on the books. It's called Act 164, and that law sets a path forward to creating a cannabis control board that will regulate cannabis businesses and issue cannabis business licenses. And ultimately, beginning in the second half of 2022, we will finally have legal cannabis sales in Vermont. As part of that law, there is going to be a need for towns to opt in to allow those cannabis retailers, and this presentation is going to talk about that process and how do you get your town to participate in that opt-in system. So first, an important disclaimer: while I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney. Everybody's situation is unique. The law is very fact-specific. Before you rely upon any information that is presented here, which is for informational purposes only, please consult with your own attorney about your personal circumstances. Do not rely on this presentation as legal advice. We do not have an attorney-client relationship by virtue of your participation in this seminar. With that out of the way, how do we get here? As Monica alluded to, there was a lot of debate over opt-in versus opt-out. And what that means is, should towns be able to say, no, we don't want cannabis licensees in our town? Or should towns have to affirmatively say, yes, we want cannabis businesses in our town? Well, there was a lot of debate, as I said, and the Senate, when they originally passed their bill, they had an opt-out provision where a town could, by vote of its people, prohibit cannabis businesses from setting up in their town. Governor Scott promised that if the House did not change that to an opt-in system, he would veto the bill. That was one of his red lines in negotiations with the legislature. When in 2020, in early 2020, when the House Committee on Government Operations, led by Representative Sarah Copeland-Hansis, took the bill and started its hearings, Sarah, who's very clever and really motivated to get this done, crafted a compromise proposal where towns would have to opt in to allow retail sales, but the towns would have no right to either require an opt-in or an opt-out for other business types. And those other business types are cultivators, growers, manufacturers, wholesalers, and testing labs. Those are permitted in every town, subject only to local regulation that we'll get to in just a minute. So this is where we are. A town has to affirmatively opt in to allow a retail license in that town, but has no right to say no to other license types. The town does also have the authority to regulate all license types, including retailers, but in the law, that right to engage in local regulation is very, very limited. There's 3 areas that a town can regulate these businesses through. 1 is zoning, and 2 is through signed ordinances. So every town can have an ordinance regulating the size and placement of signs, and public nuisance ordinances, things like, what's a public nuisance? Noise, excessive noise complaints, public urination, drinking in public. Towns can regulate the businesses through these ordinances, but really they have to fall into these categories. A town can't use zoning, signs, or nuisance ordinances to prohibit any type of business. They can't say it is a public nuisance to sell cannabis. They could say it is a public nuisance to to have too much smell, an unreasonable amount of smell coming in, and they may require local businesses growing or selling cannabis to have filtration systems in place, and those would be subject to kind of the type of litigation that you see everywhere, to the extent that the town goes too far. But that's the kind of thing that a town can do, but it cannot outright prohibit these businesses. Very importantly, when we were working with the legislature to get this bill passed, we wanted to make sure that we were not going to repeat the worst of the mistakes that we saw other states make on local control. And we saw one of the biggest problems in Massachusetts was this idea of community host agreements, where towns would have to enter into an agreement with a licensed applicant prior to that application being submitted to the control board in Massachusetts, where they agree to host that establishment in the town. And as part of that community host agreement negotiation process, the town was authorized by state law to demand up to 3% of sales by a retailer, which is, a pretty hefty local tax effectively. But also it led to just tremendous delays. It led to tremendous disequity as folks who did not have access to a ton of capital found it very difficult to enter into that negotiation period with the town prior to even submitting their application, because they would need to be paying rent on their location and engaging in all those business activities months and months and months in advance of getting a license. And also we saw in at least one town just outright corruption process. I think is it Little River? Some town with a river in Massachusetts. The mayor is actually currently under federal indictment for shaking down a cannabis business, demanding payments in excess of the 3%, including payments to himself directly. So we in Vermont convinced the legislature not to allow that sort of thing to happen, and community host agreements are just outright banned in this law. A town has no authority whatsoever to demand any kind of concession from a cannabis business, and I think that's quite huge. Section 863 of Act 164, formerly S54, is what lays out the opt-in requirement. And it says that before this type of establishment can operate within a municipality, the municipality shall affirmatively permit. And the key points here are it has to be by Australian ballot. So it's not by a floor vote at town meeting. It has to be in a paper ballot. It can be at the regular annual town meeting, or it can be at a special meeting. So it doesn't have to be in March. And you have to specify whether you are approving retail licensees, integrated licensees, or both. An integrated licensee, for purposes of this section, means a medical dispensary that is opening for sale to the public as opposed to just for medical card holders. So you can, again, it's Australian ballot. Could be the regular meeting or a special meeting, and you have to specify which type of business you are trying to get approval for. This is language that we can share. Monica, maybe you can put it into the comments that folks can cut and paste. This is what I really suggest for folks to use as the model language for their town. So it's shall the town of, city of, insert your town's name, take out those brackets, permit the operation of licensed cannabis retailers. Here you can choose whether to add or not the integrated licensees. And then I really propose that people add the next part of this, which is subject to such municipal ordinances regulation as the select board or city council may lawfully adopt and implement. I think that second part, it's not necessary. Really all you need is shall the town permit. But having that in having that second part in the question, I think will help you as you're motivating people to vote for this at your town meeting, because there will be folks who will react to this and say, oh, we're just going to permit the operation of these businesses. We're not going to do anything to limit them at all. It's just going to be a free-for-all. I don't know. I'm a little afraid of that. There's a lot of fear out there. And certainly our opponents, the folks who want to shut down the cannabis industry before it even starts, who think that cannabis is evil and that these businesses are out there to, addict your kids. Those folks are going to seize on fear in the community to try to drive out a no vote. And so by including language like this, you are signaling to your community that this is not a free-for-all, that in fact, there will be proper local control because the select board will have an opportunity to implement ordinances and appropriate regulation. Now, again, you don't have to be so loud about it when you talk about it, but the only regulation that the select board can implement is, again, zoning, signs, and public nuisance. There are two ways to get this question onto the ballot. It's either the select board agrees to put it on, or you make them put it on. And so the first one is easy. Your select board or city council if you're a city, or your board of aldermen if you're the town of Rutland, or whatever you want to call your local municipal body, they can agree to warn an article. And that typically only requires a majority vote of the municipal body at a regular meeting. So they'll have a meeting, they'll vote on it in the meeting, and boom, it's on the ballot. Now, what if they say no? Your other option is to start collecting signatures. There is a process in Vermont law for petition signatures to get onto the local ballot. This absolutely qualifies for that process. You need 5% of your town's registered voters to sign a petition. It's only residents of the town. There are some specific requirements in the law. For example, the full text of the ballot question has to be on every signature page of your petition. And you have to include the printed name, the street address, and the signature of the person, so that your town clerk can then verify that you've collected valid signatures from town voters. There are some exceptions. I know, for example, the city of Barrie requires 10% instead of 5%. It's sort of the history in Barrie is a little bit anti-democratic. They didn't want people putting things on, trying to amend the budget. Anyway, it's a little harder in Barrie. There may be other towns I'm not aware that have higher thresholds, but most towns it's 5%. Asking your select board is absolutely the first thing you should do, and I recommend you start that process today because January 31 is the deadline for warning town meeting articles for this March 2nd. If you want this done fast, the best way is to get your select board to agree to do this by January 31. That gives you a little over 3 weeks to get this done, and so you really need to act today. I recommend that you find someone on the select board. You go onto your local website, or you call your town clerk and you find out who's on your select board. You figure out which one of those people is going to be a sympathetic person to start with. That may not necessarily be, the most liberal member of your select board. When I reached out to my select board in Middlebury, I purposely picked someone who's actually a Republican, but who's a pro-business Republican, not a conservative social Republican. And worked with him to build support within the select board so that we could get this passed without having to force it on them with a petition, even though, to be quite honest with you, I had already collected the petition signatures I needed before I went to the select board, because, come prepared. So if you start with somebody who's likely to support you, that's better. And if you don't go it alone, that's better still. If you can get some folks together with you, folks across age groups, across social status in town, business leaders, people in town who are, not business leaders, get a group together that is sort of across the spectrum. Here in Middlebury, The business community is actually very strongly in favor. Our local business improvement district leaders are for it. The local commercial real estate folks are very much in favor. Now that's probably a self financial interest concern, but take your allies where you can find them. I would urge you to send emails to all your select board members before you come to a public meeting and discuss this. Get in front of them early. Figure out when your select board meets and where. In Middlebury, the select board meets twice a month. They do it by Zoom. So, we did it that way. And it was really nice and easy. My town has a public comment period at the beginning of every meeting where any citizen can raise a topic that's not otherwise on the agenda. That would be your opportunity to raise this topic if you're not able to find someone face-to-face or over the phone or via email before a meeting. But again, don't wait. We're really at the deadline for March 2nd. Now, you may receive some pushback. I received some pushback. Pushing back on the pushback is going to be important. I think one of the things that I heard was, this is really controversial. Should we really do this? And you need to remind the folks on the select board that this is not, putting this question on the ballot is not actually controversial. You are just asking the people to decide. Finding out what the people of the town think should never be controversial. If you are afraid to hear from your voters, you need to get out of the politics business, period. They may tell you, why do we have to do this now? Businesses aren't going to be allowed until late to. Well, earlier is better both for the town and for would-be entrepreneurs. For the town, having an answer early on from the voters as to what these businesses are welcome in town will give the select board and town staff the maximum time to figure out what is the kind of zoning sign and nuisance ordinances that is appropriate for the town and implement those with public comment, with thoughtfulness, as opposed to a rushed process later. And if you can do local ordinances thoughtfully, you're going to get a better result at the end of the day than if you rush it through at the end. Similarly, for businesses or for people who want to open up businesses in a town, they really need to know before they start investing in building out a retail establishment that they're going to be welcome in this town, that they're going to be able to open. Setting up a cannabis retail business is going to be a big lift for folks. We're going to need to find out what the regulations are going to look like. The control board hasn't been formed yet, and they certainly haven't started writing the regulations yet. But I imagine that the regulations are not going to be particularly easy to start because of the fact that Governor Scott is a person appointing folks to the control board, and I'm concerned that he's going to appoint folks who are more sympathetic to the cries of the antis than the needs of actual cannabis consumers. So there's going to be a heavy lift here, and people are going to need to make substantial investments of time, effort, and money, and they're not going to do that in a town, or at least not readily do that in a town, unless they know that they're actually going to be able to open at the end of the day. So it's very important to get this done early. There's some financial incentive for the town. If your town has a local option tax, that local option tax at 1% will apply to cannabis sales. So some towns will get that direct financial benefit. Every town gets local application fees. The control board is going to set at some level local application fees and collect those and give those to the municipalities. And those fees are intended to offset local expenditures. So you may hear from your town, well, gee, if we have these cannabis stores, we're going to have all these local costs, the police, the blah, 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 blah. And the response to that is that's what these fees are for. The law says that these fees are supposed to be set at a level that offset local expenses. And so that is not a concern that the select board should have. It should be covered by fees. And There is no shame in letting your select board know that if they don't put this on the ballot, you're going to, by petition, and if you don't collect those signatures by January 31 to put it on March 2nd, they're going to be forced to hold a special election. They're going to have to hold a special town meeting on the subject that will cost the town money to administer. It's a second election. We're still in a pandemic. That is a bad idea. Forcing you to go out there and collect petition signatures puts people in danger, and forcing the town clerk to run another election puts the town clerk and voter volunteers in danger, all because they refuse to just put it on the ballot when there's an election already happening in March. There is no shame in saying that to your select board. There is no shame in saying that to your local newspaper when your select board refuses. Now, if you do have to collect signatures, it is definitely difficult right now to do. I recommend that if your town says no, and you are not able to get this onto the ballot for town meeting day, then collect your signatures at town meeting. Set up right outside the polling place in your town, wherever that may be, whether it's town hall or somewhere else. Figure out what the distance you're required to maintain from the entrance. Talk to your town clerk. That person will direct you as to exactly how far from the entrance you need to stand. Stand there. Have a little table set up. Have multiple clipboards and pens for folks. Maybe, make a show of wiping down the pens and having a dirty pen pile and a clean pen pile, just to keep people feeling comfortable. Maintain a respectful distance, wear a mask, and go out there and get folks to know that you're collecting signatures to put cannabis on the ballot. And get more signatures than you need. You need 5% of your town voters. Let's say you have 1,000 voters in your town. That means you need to get 50 signatures. Get 60, get 55, 60, get more. Because it could be that as your town clerk goes through the list of signatures that you submit, that one or more of those signatures will end up being not valid, that person actually, does not live in town or is not a registered voter in town. And so their signature is not valid. So get a buffer. Now, let's say we pass this step, we're on the ballot. What do you do now? Well, you got to run a campaign. Always be campaigning. That's my motto. And nothing comes easy. So pull together your local coalition, get people to write letters to the editor, Front Porch Forum, Facebook, maybe start a Facebook group, residents of whatever town for cannabis retail. Start a group. Get the message out there, campaign, put signs, get local business people who are supportive to put signs in their windows, get lawn signs. Handmade is even better than commercially produced, and just get that word out and campaign all the way through March 2nd. That's the end of the presentation. That's me. That's my contact information up on the screen. Reach out for, whatever it is you'd like to reach out about. I am easy to contact. And I can stop the share.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Questions?
Yay. Thank you so much. That was awesome and very informative. It's a little bit of a confusing process for people that haven't done it before. And I appreciate you actually campaigned recently, so the difficulty in campaigning and petitioning and getting those signatures during pandemic times, which is very challenging. We have some great questions so far. Thank you everyone who submitted. I'm just going to kind of start from the top down and just start from the beginning and work our way down the list here. First question, I believe from Scott Sparks. Are medical dispensaries that are already operating in a town grandfathered in and can open without opt-in, or are they subject to opt-in like everyone else?
Yeah, great question, Scott. Medical dispensaries are not grandfathered in. For a medical dispensary to open for sales to the general 21 plus public, they have to obtain an integrated license or a retail license. They don't have to get an integrated license. So those are the two licenses one of those they'll need to get. And by the way, they can only get one of those two. They can't get both. they would have to get approval. And Section 863 of the law specifically says that you have to opt in for retail or integrated or both. So if your town only has a vote on retail, then an integrated licensee could not open in your town, even if your town approves retail. That integrated licensee would then have to abandon its integrated license and get a retail license as well. I'll be quite honest with you. There's been a lot of controversy over the concept of integrated license. A lot of it has to do, I think, with it's a confusing term. An integrated license is one license that constitutes permission to engage in all of the activity allowed by each of the other licenses: retail, wholesale, manufacture, grower, and testing. So that's one license comprising 5. But a person or a company or a group of people working together or affiliated companies working together can get one of each license. So anybody can actually vertically integrate by getting each of the 5 licenses, or 2 of the 5, or 3 or 4 of the 5. If a town only opts in for retail licenses and not integrated licenses, that doesn't mean that that town has now not allowed medical dispensaries to open to the public. It means is that town has engaged in an approval that will require that medical licensee to get a retail license instead of an integrated license. And that only matters for about 5 months between May and October of 2022, because there's that period of time where integrated licenses will have been issued, but retail licenses would. So that is very important for that 5-month period. And I know folks are eager to get into the market and have the market start fairly, but keep in mind that starting October 2022, there will really be no more difference going forward between which kind of license a person can get. Because again, anybody can vertically integrate through acquiring all those licenses, or just some of those licenses, and the rules applicable to those licenses are the same throughout. So an integrated licensee has to comply with all of the same rules that any other licensee of each type would have to comply with, including, I want to note, including the requirement to have your products be tested by an independent licensed testing lab. That is definitely required. Does that answer the question? I hope. Probably more than answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that does answer the question pretty well. It's a little bit confusing for sure. Okay, cool. So our next question, and it's a little bit related to, I think you kind of answered it in your last question. When a town opts into retail, can the town define the style of dispensary they will allow? So you just basically answered it in saying that they have to allow retail or integrated licenses, or both, right?
That's right. And so those are kind of the 2 ways to retail: is an integrated license or a retail license. Now, there may be many different kinds of dispensaries, right? You could have a kind of full-blown, almost looks like an Apple store, glass cases and pretty products on display, or you could have a lower end, let's call it, a just more, regular store that did not invest so much in kitting. And so, a town really doesn't have the ability to require, the style of a store. So, that's not a matter of local control. The control board could institute certain standards, and we'll see what they do. So, that's possible. And also, there is a provision in the law that allows for tiers of retail licenses. And that's something that I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on and talking with whoever gets appointed to the control board on, because I think, I know because I talked with the legislators while this was being written. The idea here is, there's got to be a way to let existing mom and pop businesses, those struggling small town general stores, get into this business without making them, run through the rigmarole of like a, giant cannabis, like, 10,000 square foot, store, right? There's got to be a way to regulate businesses intelligently and focus on the actual risk. And that's what these tiers of licenses are intended to accomplish in the law. And so we might not see tiers on day one, on October 2022. But it's something that I think as we continue to push for long-term success of this industry, is that we've got to find a way to allow small tier retailers, again, whether that's through general stores in small towns, or even through farmer market sales or CSA. The law contemplates that through these tiers, and that's going to require some more long-term work. But one day, I do hope we get there.
Nice, thank you. Next question. I think this one's pretty straightforward. Would this be through CBD retail, not just THC?
There is no license required under either the hemp law or Act 164 to sell CBD hemp products. The law, Act 164, does say that if you are a licensed retailer and you are selling hemp-derived CBD products, those have to be displayed separately from THC products. So the law definitely contemplates that a licensed cannabis retailer will be able to sell CBD as well, but you absolutely do not need any kind of license or registration today to sell CBD at retail. The Vermont's hemp law is very explicit in saying that there is no hemp registration required to sell. Any retailer can sell CBD products today.
Awesome, thank you. That's great clarification as well about CBD products in future dispensaries that I think I didn't actually feel like I maybe knew that, but that's a good distinction as well.
It's going to be interesting, if folks are trying to, like, for example, take a THC product and, incorporate it with some hemp-derived CBD oil. And it'll be very interesting from a, regulatory perspective. How is it that can be sold? Because technically the law says you have to maintain separate displays for the hemp-derived products. But what if the hemp-derived CBD is in the THC product? That's going to be something that we're going to need to discuss with the control board. There's a lot of things to work on.
Yeah, they have a big, whomever ends up in those positions will have a big job ahead of them, for sure. Would a question about petitioning, would electronic signatures work, or does a petition need to be physically signed?
Unfortunately, the legislature did not change the petition law for COVID, and you must get physical signatures. Yeah.
That is tough. I will agree with them. But from a legal standpoint, a physical signature is much more admissible, I suppose, than an electronic signature, as far as I understand.
The e-sign has been around for a long, long time, and I would hope that Vermont could get with the times. I mean, we're talking about early 2000s kind of stuff here. But no, not for local petitioning. You must get a physical signature. And let me just stress again, going door to door is just do not do it, right? Figure out where people already are. Hang out in front of your, the co-op here in Middlebury would be a place, right? A place where people are already shopping, people who would be inclined to sign a petition. Or, again, if your select board refuses to do this by January 31, go to where the voters are on town meeting day and get them to sign this there. I went and collected my signatures in November on election day, setting up, for doing this in December. I was there for 12 hours, 7 to 7. I was running for office. I was on the ballot anyway, so it's quite normal for a candidate to be standing out there with a sign, vote for me. But it was great. It was a lot of fun to talk with folks. about cannabis. People were really excited. You know, I would call out to people as they would walk across towards the front door, and start talking to them. Hey, would you come and sign a petition? We're going to get local approval to put cannabis. As soon as I say cannabis, they turn around and come to the table. People are excited about this. People want to buy cannabis in stores. So just get in front of people, but be safe.
Nice, great job multitasking. All right, a couple more questions here. This is from Scott Sparks again. He says, I have contacted 2 cannabis-friendly Vermont banks about getting a mortgage for a building, but both have said no due to federal law. Are you aware of different information where one can get a mortgage?
Yeah. Cannabis banking is a problem. And there are, to my knowledge, 2 institutions in Vermont that are willing to bank cannabis businesses. They are the Vermont State Employees Credit Union and Brattleboro Savings and Loan. I don't know whether that willingness to bank extends to lending. Cannabis is still a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act at the federal level. It is that means the most dangerous kind of drug out there. It's like heroin. It will kill you. It will kill your children. It has no medical value. That's what the feds say. I hope that's going to change. We are going to have a majority Democratic Congress in both houses. We're going to have a Democratic president. Now, Joe Biden has been no friend to cannabis in his career. So I'm not going to, sit here and tell you that it's all roses. We're going to have to fight in Congress, and we're going to have to work really hard. But I think that within the next 2 years, really by the time that Vermont cannabis businesses can open, I really do think that cannabis will come off the Controlled Substances Act Schedule I. And that will make it easier for banks to provide a full line of banking services, including lending. But right now, I think you'd be very hard pressed to find any bank in Vermont willing to rent to you. There are, you could look in Colorado. There are some banks that really have tried to specialize in cannabis, and you can see if they'll do something for you. Right now, you're at the, unfortunately, you need to find private equity, basically, private money lenders, and that means more interest. And worse terms and worse lenders and just people you don't really necessarily want to be dealing with because they're assholes. That's the situation we're in. And I really hope that Congress, acts fast to deal with this because it's a problem.
Yeah, I'm also hopeful that we will have some federal level change addressing this very soon. Another question here. South Royalton, I just moved to Vermont from southern New Hampshire. I would like to get involved in this effort here. Do you know if anyone in South Royalton is already making an effort? I
don't. There you go. I don't. Apparently, Christine Taylor is, and you guys get together.
Awesome. No, that's great. It can be a little tough, because there's not, you don't have that kind of, you can't go out and see people. There's not that sort of natural, fluid, one-on-one running into people kind of thing that we usually have. So it's very challenging indeed. Last call for questions, just kind of putting that out there. If anybody has anything else, any burning questions in their minds. Oh, here we go. If lending is an issue, as other attendees allude to, how long can you expect small business retailers to enter the market once access to licenses opens up 5 months after you integrated licenses?
Yeah, it's the traditional access to capital it makes things harder, and folks are going to need to find alternative sources of capital. And look, there are folks out there, both in Vermont and out of Vermont, who are interested in investing in cannabis businesses. And I recommend that folks, start asking around, talking to their networks of people. And getting the word out there that they're trying to start things. But it's without access to the banking system. It is not great.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just kind of reading through the list here. One moment. Okay. Some of these questions are a little more about licensing in general, which I know everybody's is like dying to know all this information that we don't have yet, right? So, can one building house multiple cannabis entities of different types of licenses? For example, if there is a cooperative of different farmers and producers, and a part of that is for retail and it's sectioned off.
Yeah, great question. Yes, is the short answer. The restrictions in the law around consolidation are really about horizontal consolidation. I helped write into this law the country's strictest limit on consolidation. So no person can own or control, directly or indirectly, more than one license of each type, and each license permits operation at one location. Now, that means that a person can have one store and one store only, and one grow operation and one grow operation only. But it does not mean that you cannot have a grow operation and a retail operation in the same building, and it does not mean that you can't have multiple grow operations in the same building. That is all permitted in the law. And so I think, when I was talking with legislators, I think there was a clear decision by legislators to prevent industrialization of this market. We've seen in other states how companies will gobble up these businesses and start conglomerates. And I think it was quite clear that the Vermont legislature had no appetite for, a Starbuds or McWeed. McWeed isn't a real thing, but Starbuds actually is. There's a chain of 17 dispensaries in 3 states called Starbuds. I don't know how they didn't get sued yet, but they would not. That kind of thing would not be allowed. We won't have chains, but we can have an intervale style grow cooperative where somebody owns the land or sets up a building or a hoop house or whatever it may be, and rents out plots or individual rooms to disparate growers. As long as that one person is not controlling multiple licenses, that's okay. And control, it means a few things. It means certainly 10% or more ownership, that's control. But it could also mean being a member of the control of the licensee's board of directors, or having contractual rights to dictate the operations of the business. So it's a broad definition, but I certainly envision cooperative style businesses cropping up, because that is going to be a way for folks to be able to keep their businesses small but still have ready access to market. So yeah, I do think that's going to happen. I see Tim made an excellent comment about the Safe Banking Act. Look, the current Congress is over, thank fucking God. the Safe Banking Act did not pass, and Congress is not going to pass anything else until inauguration. Now, whether they'll bring back something like the Cannabis Banking Act or the MORE Act, we'll see. I do think something is going to happen, and I do certainly recognize that there is a lot of lobbying going on for banking access. And so I think that is going to be part of it. I don't know that the SAFE Act is going to be the thing that happens. I think it might be something that incorporates the SAFE Act's principles of getting ready access. But Tim, I think you're right that we're going to get something, and soon, I hope.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, very hopeful for sure. So I think that is probably just about all of the questions. I have actually my own, this is a little bit of a broader question. In terms of the timeline, I know that we have, we set up sort of a rudimentary timeline for how we're going to roll out the adult use market. Do you see that timeline staying about on track? Or do you see everything from the control board nominations to anything else kind of being pushed back due to COVID? Like, what can we expect as far as how quickly things are going to happen given the unprecedented circumstances that we're working in?
It's really hard to tell right now. And, I certainly wouldn't bet my house on licenses being issued exactly on the timeline laid out. But the wheels are in motion. The Cannabis Control Board Nominating Committee has been formed. So that's the first step in the process, is this multi-body committee that will review the governor's proposed applicant and send back to the governor a list of approved. My understanding is that they've not yet met to discuss any nominees because the governor hasn't made any nominees. Mike McKinney asks, who's on the nominating committee? Let's see, it's Chris Pearson and Jeanette White were the Senate nominees. John Gannon and Janet Ansell were the House's nominees. The governor appointed 3. One was like the associate general governor. I think Anson Tebbets is on that board, and that's probably a good sign. Anson has been, of all the people in the Scott administration, the least hostile to cannabis. And there's a third person. I think someone with some. It's an attorney. I think her experience is in like the renewable energy field. I'm not really 100% certain. No, VSAC, Vermont Student Assistance Corp. So it's an attorney with experience in sort of like financial services broadly, let's say. So those are the people. It's 7 people. They need to review nominees from the governor. I've heard that the governor has closed applications for the control board. So I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but hopefully that nominating committee will start getting people. Then, those people will get nominated and confirmed and start work. Look, let's be honest. There's no need for an 18-month period between signing a bill into law or letting it become law without signature. It's a ridiculous process if Phil Scott is put and the launch of the market. In Nevada, when Nevada legalized cannabis through a referendum, they had stores open within 6 months. That's realistic. That's possible. And the control board could do that if it were motivated. So, I think if we can get good people on the control board and we can, motivate those people to act fast, they do have the authority to hire consultants. There are a couple of consultancies out there who are experienced in writing state regulations. One of them has been involved a little bit in Vermont. It was the guy who launched Colorado's program, Andrew Friedman. He started a consultancy. I've spoken with him. He says, that it's realistic to go faster. It wouldn't even be all that expensive to go faster to launch if we were to launch a flower only market to start and leave for further deliberation the thornier questions of manufactured products, we could get going within months. That's something that folks should push the control board once it's formed to get their asses in gear and get these regulations written and get these licenses issued, because if you're like me, you're sick of waiting for this industry to be legal and exist. And so we'll see. It's also entirely possible that because we elected Phil Scott, that we're gonna sit here and be well into 2022 before anything happens, or even 2023. We'll see. It's unknowable.
Thanks. Cool. I have one more quick question, so you can quickly answer this, and I'll just have some last couple things at the end. How do we access the control board once formed? A question from Kenneth. Will that body have contact or discourse with the public, or is it a closed circle?
Vermont has a open meetings law that will apply to the control board. So the control board will have to publicly warn its meetings. Those meetings will have to be accessible to the public. Now, right now, with all the COVID precautions, those meetings aren't actually open to the public. They are accessible to the public. So like legislative meetings right now, they're happening via Zoom. So you can go onto YouTube and watch the Zoom simulcast, but that's not the same as being in the room, right? So we'll see. I think we're all hopeful that COVID's going to be over soon and we'll be able to resume normal life. And once that happens, the control board ought to be meeting in person, and it ought to be open to the public. And public participation is absolutely built into Vermont law generally. And so, no, this will not be, some kind of closed cabal. That's just not legal. They are going to have to publish notices of their meetings. They're going to have to publish their drafts. And there is also a very powerful Freedom of Information Act type law, the Public Records Law in Vermont, where anybody can demand any government records, with very few exceptions. So no, this will not be a secret process. It cannot be. That's
transparency is sexy. So I think that's about it for questions. So just as a little follow-up, if people have additional questions, they can contact Dave or myself. I'm Monica at HeadyVermont.com and dave.silberman@gmail.com, I believe. So feel free, anything on your mind, just let us know, and we're happy to help, whether you're looking to connect with people in your town, looking for things specifically. And if you have ideas for what you want to hear from our next Grow Vermont Together session, if you burning questions in your mind, let us know, and we'll be happy to try and address those. Cool. So I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining us and imparting some of your wisdom. I'm not an attorney, so I'm glad to hear it from somebody who knows the law. And good luck to everyone in the various municipalities throughout Vermont in trying to get this onto the ballot of some kind. Very exciting.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thanks a lot. We'll see everybody soon. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.